This game was played between Magnus Carlsen and Nikita Petrov in 2023 World Rapid in the round 1, where Magnus Carlsen started with 1 e4 and Nikita Petrov replied with e5. Magnus continued with knight to f3. Nikita replied with knight to, to c6 and Magnus Carlsen played bishop to b5, started off with Roy Lopez or Spanish. Here, there are multiple options that can be played. One is knight to f6, so-called Berlin variation. Second option is bishop to e7, that leads to some close Roy Lopez variations like prayer variation and Shigorin variation and also archangle variation. And third most common reply is uh, pawn to a6, and one more reply can be seen as bishop to c5, that is called classical variation. Here Nikita continued with a6, kicking the bishop away, where Magnus Carlsen just retreat his bishop to a4. Here, Nikita had multiple options again. One most common option is knight to f6. Second option is pushing d pawn to d6, and one more option is playing uh, bishop to e7, that is most common option. But here Nikita Petrov continued with bishop to c5. This is called actually deferred classical defense. If this move was not played before and this bishop was not retreated earlier from here, this would called classical defense. But after this, it is called deferred classical variation of Roy Lopez. Here, Magnus Carlsen continued with knight to c3, developing knight, where Nikita replied with d6, just solidifying this pawn chain. But here, this knight is actually pinned against this king. So any check, any capture would lead to a check also. Here, Nikita continued with, here Magnus Carlsen just uh, throws his pawn and attacks the center, where Nikita just took the pawn on d4, attacking the knight also. Here, Magnus Carlsen takes back with knight. Nikita uh, played knight to e7. Actually, this knight maneuver is mostly seen in Kozia variation of Roy Lopez, but here Nikita uh, plays knight to e7, just defending this knight because this knight is attacked twice. So after take, so here after take, take. Actually, this would be a fork that would lead to loss of the rook. So here, uh, Nikita actually defended this knight twice. This can actually be a good move. So Magnus Carlsen develops his bishop to e3. This was the last piece to be developed. Here, Nikita does just pushes his pawn to b5, attacking the bishop, and Magnus Carlsen just retreats the bishop. Nikita takes knight on d4 with bishop. Carlsen takes back with bishop. Nikita takes on d4. Carlsen takes with queen, and here Nikita castles out. Magnus just retreats its queen to d2. Uh, Here he has both options, castle either on queen side or also on king side. And here this game is much simplified because two minor pieces have been exchanged. Here uh, Nikita continued with King Catos his bishop to b7. Here Magnus Carlsen just castles out on king side. Nikita continues with c5. Here uh, Magnus actually continues with d5, pinning this bishop. If this bishop is moved somewhere, like in here, this rook is hanging. So Nikita takes bishop with knight. Magnus Carlsen take back with knight, and here Nikita is not uh, so interested in taking this with bishop and losing his bishop in multiple ways, either taking with pawn and taking with queen. But he continues and builds pressure on this pawn. Actually, this is undefended, where Magnus replies and defends this pawn by pushing this pawn on f3. Nikita now takes knight on d5. Magnus takes back with queen. Nikita plays queen to b6. At this moment, we have two rooks for both sides and queen for both sides, and all the minor pieces have been exchanged, and there is not any weaknesses in this position. uh, White has 3 versus 4 3 versus 4 pawns on queen side. On the other hand, White has majority of 4 versus 3 pawns on king side. So there is not much. This here the game is equal, where all the minor pieces have been traded off. So here, this is actually very start of the end game, where Magnus aligns this rook with queen on d1. Nikita continue. Nikita aligns this queen with align this rook with queen, where Magnus aligns his other rook with other rook on e1. Nikita thus pushes now his pawn to h6. Magnus uh, moves his king to f1. Now Nikita attacks on queen. He cannot take because of his pawn this is defended by the pawn, so he retreats his queen to d2. Now Nikita pushes his pawn. Here White has multiple options. One is pushing this pawn and attacking the rook. One second option is taking with pawn. Obviously queen cannot take the pawn because of rook. So here uh, White takes pawn and Black takes back with queen with rook and also doubles up the rook against queen and rook. So here Magnus has uh, two options. Either move queen uh, somewhere so as to uh, somewhere so as to be to rook cannot take the queen to defend it, or second option is if he takes he takes, and rook takes back. So queen is exchanged with two rooks. So instead of running away, Magnus accepts his challenge and takes rook, where rook takes back with rook, and now rook takes rook. So at this position, Magnus has two rooks and Nikita has one queen, and they have already entered in the end game where Nikita has three pawns on queen side and Magnus also. Nikita has three pawns on king side and so as Magnus Carlsen. So this looks very drawish position because there is no any weaknesses. If there was one rook against one queen, this could lead to a winning position, but this looks very draw. So here, uh, Nikita continues with queen to f6. Magnus Carlsen pushes his pawn. Nikita attacks this pawn with queen and also trying to enter somewhere in here. Magnus defends this pawn with king. Nikita enters on queen side by playing queen to c4. Now this pawn is attacked. This rook is also attacked. Magnus can save only one thing in a one move, one piece in a one move. So he had an idea. Just move rook to d8 and give a check and save his rook. Now black has to move his king. Now this was also hanging, but now Magnus pushes this pawn and this pawn is protected by this pawn now. Here Nikita pushes this pawn to b4. Magnus takes. Nikita takes back on b4. White takes back on b4 and black takes with queen. And now we can see one pawn versus one pawn on queen side and three pawns versus three pawns on king side and two rooks and one queen. So here this is the maneuver that was played by both players. Magnus just comes back on 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 first rank. Nikita takes pawn. Magnus threatens this pawn. But here Nikita plays queen to c3, defending this pawn in a way. If you take this pawn, I will take your rook with a check and mate. So instead of taking, Magnus first saves his king and moves away because there would not any other fork coming in here because of this light scale, because dark scale is open. So Nikita pushes his pawn. So these two rooks were in a fork. So Magnus first saves this rook and he says, now if you take my rook, I will take your queen with king. So Nikita pushes his pawn. So he says, now I know you can take my pawn, but now after pushing, this is protected by queen. So here Magnus plays his rook to a4, attacking this pawn. Nikita pushes. Here white plays rook to a1, attacking this pawn with two rooks. Now this is actually lost theoretically, where Nikita plays king to g7. Magnus finally takes this pawn, and now board is clear on queen side and only 3 versus 3 pawns on king side, and again one queen versus 3 pawns, where queen to d4 was played, rook to a7 was played, queen to e5 was played. Magnus pushes his pawn to h3. Queen d4 was played, rook a4 was played, attacking the queen. Queen e5 was played, rook to d1 was played, queen to f2 was played, and now finally my Magnus doubles up the rook on d5. Nikita plays queen to e5 because if now this pawn is if this rook moves somewhere in here, this rook is hanging. So Magnus first moves this rook as that was attacked by the queen on d7, and also this pawn cannot be pushed at this position. Nikita plays queen to e2. This cannot be taken, this cannot be taken, this cannot be taken, everything is defended. Rook to d5 was played, queen to e6 was played, king to h2 was played, queen to e3 was played. Because here he cannot give a check and win any material, but here he can go in here and give a check. If there is a fork coming, he can win some material, but Magnus just goes rook to d1. Nikita now gives check, but Magnus moves away. Queen to e2 was played, king to h1 was played, queen to e5 was played, rook f1, queen e2, rook d1, queen c2, rook e1, queen d3. Now finally Magnus decides to push this pawn, where Nikita blocks this pawn with queen. Now Magnus just attacks on other way on the queen. Nikita defends. Magnus moves his rook away. King to g7. Everything was at a perfect position, so he decides to move his king forward to the pieces. King h2 was played. Queen d6 was played. Rook e5 was played. So this was actually not a useful move. It was actually just aligning this rook on this file. So here Nikita just plays queen to f6, rook d5 was played, queen e6 was played, rook d1 was played, queen f5 was played, rook e1 was played. Actually they were maneuvering in a way, just shuffling pieces, so as if other player make some blunder, but waiting for any blunders. But both were competitive players, so there was no blunder coming. So here Nikita plays his king to g8. Again, this position is repeated. This position is repeated. This position is repeated. This position is repeated. Now, this is not actually here. Finally, Magnus creates a way to push his pawn again, where Nikita plays queen to f6. Finally, Magnus pushes his pawn on f5, where instead of taking, Nikita pushes this pawn. Magnus gives check, and Nikita plays king to g7. Now Magnus defends this pawn one more time. Queen c3 was played. So here there is a trick. If this pawn is pushed, and queen here could make some trouble for white, where Magnus uh, plays rook to d6. Queen e3 was played. Now finally, Magnus pushes pawn again with a check. This cannot be taken with king because of rook. So he moves his king forward. He retreats his rook to d1, and now this is actually a triple fork. This rook is attacked, this pawn is attacked, and king is attacked. King is on check. King h1 was played, queen f4 was played, continuing attack, continuing pressure on f6 pawn. Rook d4 was played, attacking the queen. Now, this would be much trickier if Nikita takes this pawn with queen. There would be a pin by after moving rook to d6. So Nikita obviously was, and this also now this actually could not be taken with king either because of this. But here he can take simply. So he moves his queen away. Rook d8 was played. So here this pawn can be taken, but again cannot be taken by queen because of pin. So he takes pawn with king. If there was a dark square bishop, then it was could have some beneficial, but now there is no way to win for white also and for black also. This is actually still a draw position. Magnus now continues rook to g8, queen to f4, king to g1, e3, queen e3 check, king to h1 check, queen to f4, king to g1, and finally e3, queen to e3 was a repetition, and also both players agrees on a draw. So this is actually a game in the collection Roy Lopez classical variation. So if you are looking for any game in Roy Lopez classical variation, this is a perfect example for both sides.